gym leading up to Ole Miss LSU. Both Kiffin and Kelly have spoke to the media already. Respect from both sides in a relationship that I'm speculating here. I'm just kind of outside looking in. I don't think they like each other a lot. I mean, they're kind of constantly poking at one another through media, like the Coca-Cola, the water thing. They kind of, Lane Kiffin making fun of him dancing, kind of calling him out on Twitter. I mean, these are two pretty egotistical, prideful guys that don't like to go back and forth on, on themselves, and especially have somebody else call them out. And they kind of do it, but they kind of lightly tread around it in the sense of you wonder what the real relationship is. They've gone back and forth on some recruits. There's some things that they've got, from a historical standpoint. They say the right things publicly, but they kind of say it holding their nose along one another. So I think it's it's another kind of ingredient of throwing into the gumbo of what is LSU and Ole Miss's rivalry, and the history of it, the colors of it, the tradition of it, the back and forth of it. I think there's just
pageantry.
There's chapters and layers to it, and it's just another piece here in the latest line. Remember, Daily, we're brought to you by R&B Builders, Rhett Bourgeois and the crew. Shout out to Rhett. Remember, Rhett can get you into a custom design home. rmb-builders.com. rmb-builders.com is where you can find them. And always, you can get in touch with them on social media. Our phone line is brought to you by our friends over at Southern Regional Medical Center. Real doctors, real solutions. As we said, Jacques will be there at 8 a.m. this morning. We'll talk to Jacques and get his thoughts of Saturday and kind of the lead up to it. He has been on the ground level talking to coaches and players and get his thoughts on what Saturday night could look like in Tiger Stadium. We're always a part of the Gordon squad, getgordon.com. Remember, you can find those guys online at 888-8888, Louisiana's big truck lawyer and NIL king. Get in touch with Gordon. And we've also been reminding you about our sponsor, A-Bears Lawn and Maintenance. They're helping you out with your Christmas lights this season. Get in touch with them on Facebook. They put them up, service them, take them down. Very simple from our friends over at A-Bears. In fact, they're doing Halloween lights as well if you want to get out in front of that too. So get in touch with A-Bears Lawn and Maintenance for much more than just landscaping on Facebook. So, look, LSU Ole Miss, man, where do you start, right? I mean, there's so many stories and history to Ole Miss. And if there is one in LSU's search in what seemingly has been kind of decade runs of rivals, to me, LSU has not had that historical mainstay rival, but if there was, to me, it would be Ole Miss, right? Ole Miss has Mississippi State. They play the Egg Bowl, so if you asked Ole Miss who their rival would be, without even thinking, they would tell you that it was the in-state Mississippi State squad. For LSU, there's not that Alabama to its Auburn, right? There's not that Florida to its Florida State, Georgia to its Georgia Tech, Texas to its Texas A&M. LSU is, from my point of view, I would sacrifice the in-state rival or the mainstay rival to have the state to yourself. Being an SEC school in recruiting healthy territory like LSU is and have the state to yourself is a tremendous luxury in a conference that is overloaded with schools that are piled on top of each other right in the middle of, fertile recruiting grounds. For as popular of a state of Georgia that Georgia is, and it's a talented state when it comes to high school football, a lot comparable to Louisiana, small in size, but big in talent. I mean, you have schools, cherry-picking Georgia that are right on top of it. Florida, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Florida State, Auburn, Alabama, South Carolina. I mean, it's just, they got a ton of talent. But, I mean, you're fighting so many people off. Now, Kirby Smart has done it better than anybody. but that's a lot of work. And not saying that you have to play defense in Louisiana, but, I mean, LSU kind of has the pick of the litter. I mean, they kind of, they're like, hey, who's the best 20 players in the state? We'll take 15 of them. So, I mean, LSU doesn't have that, which in my opinion is a luxury. I would much rather have that, the LSU situation, than have the, playing Louisiana Tech every year and them be in the SEC or Tulane. But if you ask for one rival, one that historically holds up on the LSU side and really the Ole Miss side, I think it's Mississippi. I think it's Ole Miss. I think, from when I was a kid, I know my grandfather and his podnas, my uncles, they hated Ole Miss. They talked about Ole Miss a lot like this generation talks about Alabama, a lot like my friends and I would talk about Auburn, a lot like Lloyd and his podnas probably talk about Florida. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, it's just, Lloyd and I are 10 years apart. I mean, that's to me how LSU's rivalries have run, right? Noah's would probably be Alabama. I say rival, but just the school that you talked about every single year. I mean, to me, the Alabama game wasn't really a rivalry. That was a beatdown. The Auburn series in the 10 years that, I was in my 20s was a rivalry. It was back, the home team would constantly win. The road team couldn't win. The Florida series.
Home team.
Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Right? This Ole Miss series to me has been, for the most part, held up throughout the decades. Whether it was the obvious ones, Billy Cannon, Brad Davis, Leonard Fournette. I mean, there's all types of generational heroes that have popped out of this game. Odell Beckham, punt return. I mean, there's just always been Ole Miss story LSU game. I don't think Saturday night's any different. I think Saturday is going to be electric. I really do. I think it's kind of loading and gearing up to be that environment, the game. I mean, this line is LSU as an underdog in a night game coming off of a bye week versus Ole Miss. Good Lord. Pump that into my veins. I mean, that place is going to be buzzing Saturday night. And I believe that, Ole Miss is battling some things that they played 7 straight weeks. And whether they played high school teams the first month of the year or not, they are beat up, man. Lost a couple of offensive linemen last week. Trey Harris does not sound like he is good to go. Even if he does play, I mean, Lane Kiffin speaking about him Monday in his press conference, when asked about him, you could see his stomach was turning. He was sick to his stomach having to really say he's like, we don't really talk about injuries here, but I mean, he left the game and couldn't come back Saturday and hasn't practiced. And I mean,
he said yesterday that if the game was today, he wouldn't be playing. We're preparing to do that and preparing to play without him, Kiffin said. But also, this could be lanekiffin.com.
I agree, but let me tell you, I watched Monday's press conference. I know he knows what he's doing up there, but I mean, he also is kind of like Brian Kelly in the sense where he's a little transparent. I mean, it's not like he's
honest
Nick Saban up there, playing like a war leader. I mean, he's pretty open. And, I thought he was pretty honest. I mean, I got that feeling on Monday when he was talking about Harris. If this game was in the next 3 to 4 days, he ain't playing. And even if he does play on Saturday night, it feels like he doesn't have there's a chance he might not be Trey Harris, who was an LSU killer last year. I mean, like he was probably the MVP of the game.
He scored the game-winning touchdown.
Yeah, but did way more than that.
Well, for sure, but it was just the last drive. You see, I mean, he has 52 catches. I believe. What's their second leading receiver? Second leading receiver, I believe, has 18 catches.
It's tight end, isn't it? The tight end,
right? And so, like, clearly, Lane Kiffin has focused on him, and he's been instrumental in what they're trying to do offensively. But I mean, that's almost like if you take away Malik Neighbors last year,
right?
Where you're like, that's your
exactly
guy.
what that is.
Yeah.
Juice Wells has 17 catches behind Harris's 52.
Like, that's such a disproportionate amount of.
Yeah.
I mean, Juice Wells is a player.
Yeah,
but
they two receivers with 17 and 18 behind 52.
52 that's a good part of your offense.
Yeah.
Like, I would be hard pressed to say just because he does have 52 catches and how much he's featured that he's going to do everything he can to get him on the field.
Yeah.
And that tourdoll.com, shoot him up, and then we'll figure it out after this. But it's not the same thing as LSU with Chris Hilton where you have the luxury of you don't have to really play him.
Right.
And we'll see if that comes to bear fruit on Saturday because it still doesn't feel like you're getting the answers that you're maybe looking for whenever it comes to the Chris Hilton conversation where he's practiced. He's been probable for 3 weeks. And so that's where I think it's very interesting with Harris. Like, if you 52 catches, 885 yards, 5 touchdowns. If you take that out the offense.
Yeah, that's huge.
Huge.
I mean, that's enormous.
And I think Lane Kiffin can scheme you up for one more game.
No doubt.
He'll find somebody to step in,
Right.
but clearly he trusts him.
Yeah, I mean, he's a big playmaker. I mean, he's one of their playmakers. He's one of their guys that they look to change the scoreboard. This high-flying offense that we talk about Ole Miss, Trey Harris, huge part of that. I mean, enormous part of believing why they can do stuff like that. So, it's a huge point. They also have some things on the offensive line because I believed going into this game, LSU healthy, Ole Miss healthy. To me, the way that Kentucky beat Ole Miss, beating them up, physically really pushing them around for 4 quarters, I'd like to be proven wrong, but I don't know for a fact that LSU can play like that for, 48 minutes. That they can play like that for the entire game. So, I mean, if you catch Ole Miss at the right time, which that's what the schedule comes down to. I mean, where you catch teams really matters. And Ole Miss, after 7 straight weeks and LSU coming off of a bye, now LSU still beat up, and they still have players that lost for the season in Guillory, John Emery and Harold Perkins. I mean, there's still guys that are trying to battle back like Hilton. But I mean, catching Ole Miss right now feels like advantage LSU. Where they're 7 weeks into this thing, no break, coming off of 2 physical weeks versus Kentucky, South Carolina, and having to load up and come to Baton Rouge at night as a favorite. Man, if they get out of here with a win, they'll earn it. If they get out of here with a win, that will be their best win of the season if they can do that. And for LSU, you get a win on Saturday night, you're right back in the discussion with these one-loss SEC teams looking around, kind of saying, "Hey, if it's not Tennessee, if it's not Alabama, if it's not LSU, I mean, it's one of these teams that are going to have to fight every single week to stay alive." And I love it, boys. I mean, I love the fact where they are. I mean, I've seen how many college football seasons have we all been a part of where LSU plays 3 big games a year, 3 games a year, right? Where it used to be Florida in the kind of the October. Mm-hmm. It was Alabama
in
November, and maybe Texas A&M late November. Was the 3 games that you kind of were like, hey, they better be ready to play in a couple of weeks. They better be ready to play against Texas A&M at Thanksgiving. They better be ready to play against Alabama in November. They better be ready to play every single week now. Like every single week. LSU has now become one of these teams that we talked about in the offseason that is example of the changing sport, college football, in front of our face. Like, they are now a team fighting for a playoff spot, just like NFL teams. Every single week they take the field. It matters. Like, it matters how you play. It matters the outcome. It matters what's going on. I mean, think about Joe Burrow right now. I mean, Burrow's playing at an MVP level. Not a lot of people talking about him. I mean, he's plus 70% completion percentage. I think he's 14-2 touchdown interception ratio. I mean, him and Jamar are cutting up the league. They're 1-4. I mean, play as good as you want. What'd Parcells say? League's about your record. You are who you are. I mean, in college football, that's kind of the storyline now. And LSU is a great example of that team that if every single week it feels like they're going to either be a 3-point dog like they are this week at home, or they'll be a pick 'em to a 3-point favorite. I mean, at no point do I see any game that you look at on paper and say, yeah, that team's significantly better than LSU, or LSU is significantly better than that team. So, I mean, for as amped as I know I am to be in the stadium and watch LSU in a big game atmosphere on Saturday night, we're going to be talking about the same thing next week. Traveling to Arkansas, if they're able to pull it off on Saturday versus the Rebels. Then if they do it versus the Hogs, we're talking about it again the next week. I kind of love it. I mean, I don't hate it.
No, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like you said, you can circle games. Like before the year, I feel like Ole Miss was one of the ones that were circled on the calendar. Like when people were talking about like vintage Tiger Stadium, and I feel like it's going to be one of those atmospheres for LSU, but you had the USC game circled, and then you almost tried to fast forward a little bit to their next big test would be Ole Miss. But the way that the SEC has bared fruit, it's been every game. Like the South Carolina game became massive after the loss to USC, and then it was, okay, now look around the SEC. They're beating each other up. Like it's feast or famine every week where Ole Miss can lose to Kentucky, and then Kentucky can get their doors blown off, quote unquote, because of the score, the way it looked the way that it did against South Carolina. Then LSU can beat South Carolina. And I'm starting to wonder, like, with this playoff picture, it felt like, 4 or 5 teams would probably get in from the SEC. Now, the more that you look at it, it becomes how many losses can you sustain before you start looking around the other conferences.
Right. I agree. I mean, you got Georgia and Texas on the horizon next week.
Right. Somebody has to lose.
A top 4 team is going to have a loss there.
Texas, Oklahoma this week.
I mean, you got Ohio State and Oregon on Saturday.
Georgia and Tennessee still on the schedule.
But I think for the Ohio State-Oregon game, I don't think that's inconsequential to me because whoever loses, they have one loss. They'll probably still get the benefit of the doubt being like, well, you lost to the top 3 team in the country. It's when they start stacking up and LSU or whoever, when it comes you won't be able to win your conference. And then so they'll look at a 2-loss LSU team, both probably or a 3-loss LSU team with 2 losses in the conference and go, well, Ohio State lost, but they lost one conference game to Oregon. Right. Which one do you pick?
Yeah. That's the human element of it.
And that's why they're setting it up for a 16-team playoff. Yeah. This is all...
Be 32 before you blink.
Exactly. 64. We'll start it on Monday.
Right. I mean, it started in August.
Yeah.
Just get them in.
Play 365.
Four game regular season schedule. But, I mean, to me, I think LSU living on the edge like they are every single week. I mean, it's fun till it's not.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's awesome this week. I mean, it could be over Sunday morning.
How many times do you want to go skydiving?
Right. I mean, this is awesome. Yeah. I mean, Wednesday of this stuff is cool.
Take a picture. Oh, I'm dead.
Right. Right. I mean, so wait, when's the hard part start? I mean, it's Saturday, 6:30 in Tiger Stadium. I mean, I think every single time you get off the bus, you got to lace them up, and I love it. I mean, I think it's a phenomenal place to be. I mean, for Brian Kelly's health, it's probably not the best. I mean, to live like this in some type of cardiac arrest, state of just kind of curious of what's gonna happen.
Because you could even still as much
because as good as it could go,
right. You could look up and go, you're trying to be bowl eligible.
Yeah.
Florida is fighting that
100%.
fight, but LSU going
100%.
to Florida, that just is never very easy. LSU going to Arkansas, there's no weirder game on the schedule every year where, how is this happening right now? Like there's times when they haven't been good and it doesn't matter. And so I'll put in the on the poll, who's LSU's rival in the SEC? Ole Miss, Florida, Texas A&M, Alabama. Then I ran out of choices. You only put 4. But Alabama, the runaway at 48% right now. Ole Miss in second at 20%.
See, I didn't get the Alabama thing. I mean,
well, I think
that what Alabama did was it created a lot of emotion for LSU fans, which is what a rivalry does. But a rivalry, by the true sense of the definition, is what LSU has had with teams like Ole Miss,
Florida.
Auburn, Florida. Texas A&M. Over the last couple. I mean, I hadn't won at Texas A&M since 2016. You forget that. That's a rivalry to me.
Right.
That's something that A&M can say we stand on. You've been in the league since 11. LSU hadn't won there since 16. You've played every year. I mean, that's okay. That's something that has gone back and forth. To me, that Alabama run, it could switch. It could sway. Kelly, he's 1-1 against them.
Right.
This year would be, an opportunity to kind of wrestle back or begin to wrestle back some of that